those issues. So Andrew Cameron from Primary Employers Tasmania, if I could hand over to you, if you could give us an overview of the changes to the Fair Work Act and also the initiative that's come through from the JobKeeper payments, please.
Okay, we're talking mainly about the impact of the JobKeeper provisions on the Act. In late March, the Fair Work Commission, by applications from employers and employees, changed a couple of the big industry awards that were mainly affected by COVID-19, hospitality, restaurants, and the Clerks Private Sector Award. The Fair Work Act was amended on the 8th of April. Now, the changes to the Act only apply to those employers that are eligible for the JobKeeper payments through their scheme. So it doesn't apply to everyone, it's only for those employers that are eligible for JobKeeper. The main changes to the Act were that employers are now allowed to change the hours and days of work that an employee does. They can reduce the hours of work as well. So a permanent full-time employee can have their hours or days reduced. They can also have their duties varied. The employer can ask an employee to perform other duties that they don't normally do, may not be part of their job description. The proviso is there that it's safe for them to do so and they have the skills and competence. And if it's a licensed position, for instance, if they need a license to drive a forklift, they have to have the license to do any of those duties that may be changed. And finally, with the changes to the Act, there's what they call provisions to location. So if an employee has their hours reduced, they're entitled to get consent from their employer to work for someone else so that they can supplement their income through other employment. And they could also ask for training and professional development to take place on those reduced hours. But there was another change. The annual leave provisions, an employer can now direct an employee to take annual leave under the provisions of the Act, but they have to have, they can only ask them to take as much annual leave, but the employment still has to have 2 weeks left at the end of the annual leave that's been directed. So those changes came through. The big proviso is that in changing hours, duties, or days of the week, can't change the base rate of pay that the employee is on. So their hourly rate has to remain the same. If they're cut back to 4 days, well, they're on 80% of their income and so on. So that's the big proviso there, that you can't change an employee's hourly rate of pay. Now, the awards were changed on the 9th. Now, that because it's an award change that applies to all employers and employees under those awards, the two big changes were there's pandemic leave. So an employee can actually have 2 weeks unpaid pandemic leave. So if they've got to go into isolation, self-isolation or whatever, they can have 2 weeks off. It's unpaid and it doesn't affect their continuity of employment. And the other direction there under the awards is that an employee can agree for the employee to have annual leave at half pay. So that means they could take 2 weeks off work, but be paid for 1 week. So all these changes are aimed to bring in flexibility to the workplace so that the employers and employees can work around the restrictions and reduction in business that have happened. So they're the main changes in the Act and the awards.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll wait to see if any questions come through, but Phil, I'll bring you in relation to FarmSafe and the comment that Andrew made in relation to some of the changes under the Fair Work Act around directions or standing down provisions. And one of the key things there is if there's any changes to the workplace while we're going through this phase, this disruptive phase, is that any directive means that the change still has to be safe in the workplace. So how would you like to comment around that? What are some of the things that the producer needs to take into consideration if they're looking at stand down provisions or changes to the workplace around the fact that it still has to be safe?
Oh, look, as far as the safety management side of it goes, Belinda, it doesn't really change that much, other than if there is changes in the workplace, as in changes to the tasks and what have you, the people need to have the skills and what have you, obviously, that they require perspective, it doesn't change. So it's, you know, like keep safety management and safety thinking at the forefront of minds. And I guess if the tasks are changing a little bit, you know, and I provide advice to all farmers that I speak to is, before you start your day's work and you're allocating people tasks, just take that little bit of time to stop and, you know, take the time to ask the question about, you know, about safety and how we're travelling. Do we need to do anything else? Is there anything else that, you know, that we don't know about that we need to think about and look for? So I guess the communication side of it's, you know, paramount.
Thanks for that, Phil. Some good advice there. We've had a question come through for a person, Andrew, that's a sole trader. They can enrol for JobKeeper, but they can't send the notification. How does that work in your view?
The sole traders are eligible. I can see the question is they can't send the notification through, and I suppose that may be a technical issue of the tax office trying to get the notification through. But I suppose it's just a matter of keep trying. It may be easy. I'm not sure if tax agents have some sort of special access that they can get things through more easily than people just logging on through the ATO site. It may be wise to ask your accountant if they can get on and do it for a person.
Right. Some of the questions that I've had through in different parts of the network also, Andrew, probably more dot points, if you could expand on it. So one of the key things first is that for a worker to be eligible, is it an all one in, all in? So if you want to be eligible for a JobKeeper payment in the workplace, that all workers receive a nomination form, an ATO recognised nomination form, and then workers can then complete the paperwork if they want to receive that payment.
Yes, it doesn't apply to everyone. As I understand the rules, it's the cut-off, the relevant date was the 1st of March, so it applies to permanent full-time and permanent part-time workers that an employer has, and it also applies to those casuals that have been employed on a regular and systematic basis for 12 months. Now, generally speaking, seasonal workers are excluded, but if they have a permanent visa or they've got a 444 visa, I understand that they're eligible to receive the JobKeeper allowance. But otherwise, anyone, backpackers, seasonal workers, casuals with minimal engagement, they aren't eligible to receive the JobKeeper allowance through their employer.
Thanks. The other thing that's worth noting too is the $1,500 eligibility. So the worker has to have received in the fortnight prior that minimum base of the $1,500 to be eligible. How does that work?
No.
No?
If the employee is eligible to receive the payment, no matter what their income is, the $1,500 is paid to the employer. So a permanent worker earning more than $1,500 a fortnight still gets their pay, and the $1,500 subsidises the payment. If they're, say, working and they're only earning $1,000 a fortnight, the funny thing of this is that they will get paid the $1,500. So all the money has to go to the employee. The employer can't keep that money. Now, the proviso is that if they are earning less than $1,500, the employer has the choice then as to whether they pay super on the full $1,500 or they just pay super on what their normal ordinary income would have been for the fortnight. So in the example, if they're only earning $1,000 a fortnight, the employer can choose to just pay super on the $1,000, but the employee is entitled to receive the full $1,500.
Okay, that's good. Thank you very much. Another question or query that I had, Andrew, was in relation to directives by a workplace. So if you had some concerns that that workers might need to have, you want your workers to have a flu immunisation. So in the workplace, you make it mandatory. Is that a lawful directive that you can say right, we want all our workers to have flu immunisation?
No. Obviously, privacy issues come into account there. You can say that it's available and the employees can choose whether to have it or not. Now, because the general flu vaccine that's available isn't for COVID-19, it's obviously just to reduce the risks of the standard flus that happen. And it's apparently that by having that and strengthening the immune system, it's less likely you'll pick up the COVID-19. But you can't direct an employee to have any sort of invasive needling or anything done to them. Now, an employee who doesn't have the needle or doesn't have the flu injection, the employer may look to exclude them from the workplace, but they'd have to be very careful about doing that, and they would have to stand them down on full pay for the time that they're excluded from the workplace. But I wouldn't suggest doing that. No.
No, thank you for that. I know that there's been the odd question with some of the people that I've been connecting through the network, and that was one of the questions that came through around flu immunisation, making sure that there's some coverage there in the workplace, and is it something that you could make as a mandatory directive? So that's a really good advice there. Thank you very much for that.
That's right.
Elizabeth, anything from your perspective around some of the stimulus information that's come through? We'll be sending through some information shortly. Just prior to the start of this broadcast, the Tasmanian government has just announced a support package for temporary visa holders. There's a $3 million package that's been announced to support an estimated 26,000 temporary visa holders facing financial hardship due to coronavirus in the state. I haven't had the opportunity to look into a lot of the details yet. We'll be circulating it through the network, but my understanding is it's a pandemic isolation coverage. Financially, there's $250 per person and $1,000 for a family. There's also advice and assistance available for any workers such as Pacific Islander workers to get back home. And so there's that type of information and assistance available. So I think that that's a nice, good, strong piece of leadership that's come through from the state government around making sure that workers that have come here to Tasmania to help us harvest our crops, we're trying to make sure that they're supported as best we can, either whilst they're here or endeavouring to get them home. So I'm quite sure through your network, Elizabeth, through my network and others, we'll circulate that information to make individual employers aware of that temporary visa holder support package.
Yeah, so as with Belinda, I still need to get a bit more detail as to who will be delivering that support. The main thing is that people will need to go through the public health hotline, the same as other isolation issues. That can take some time, and I know that there have been a greater response there than they have in the been able to deal with, but they have now resourced that up. So continue to provide that support and go through that public health hotline in the first instance, based on other isolation measures that we're helping to provide through emergency relief and isolation. What happens is that the public health hotline then refers on to specific organisations, including ourselves, Red Cross, Salvos, etc., to start to provide support to individuals and families involved. So I assume that it will be a similar process, and certainly we will advise when we have further information on that as to how is the best way for those that are employing or have in the past employed those seasonal workers and want to provide that support to their employees going forward. Certainly we're seeing an increased demand from those that are wanting to get access to some of the relief payments for business, particularly the small business and employer type programs, and we have a team of financial counsellors available to support that. The one thing that I would say for any small businesses in the rural space that are currently working on is that they need to start to look at what is that longer term over those winter months from a cash flow point of view, from a work health and safety and a recovery point of view, and to look at that business continuity planning. And certainly that is where the government is now looking at, and that's where our financial counsellors can assist in looking at what's the cash flow, making sure that you're in contact with your creditors and banks, and ensuring that you are all systems going and ready to get back to normal business when we're allowed to do so.
Thanks, Elizabeth. That's really good comments there. So I urge anybody that's looking for some advice to contact Rural Business Tasmania in relation to the programs and services that they can provide. They're there to help. A great resource, and so I again urge you to do so, particularly if you are not sure about some of the options from a business perspective. Phil, in looking at managing deliveries and also managing contractors and other service providers coming on farm, unfortunately I'm not able to share the screen from my device for the email that you sent through. I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind just talking through some dot points. We had some questions raised at our first Paddock Talk about a couple of areas. First one is contractors coming onto the site, whether it's milk deliveries, those types of regular routine requirements that need to occur on farm, and you've got someone from outside coming in. And there's also the issues of contract harvesters and other people coming on farm as well. So if you could give a bit of a brief overview of that, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. There's some really good information coming out of Safe Work Australia in that regard, and I've sent Belinda some links and some info sheets that some may be able to share later on, Belinda, or people can contact me and I'll directly, but be either cancelled or postponed until the coast's clear. Deliveries and other contractors that need to come on site, they should, people should be giving them clear instructions on what they should be doing when they come onto your particular work site. And I guess we've got to minimise the number of workers that are attending to any deliveries. So, for instance, if a milk tanker's coming to a dairy farm, it's pretty right there because there's not much context. One of the things that the farm owner needs to be aware of is if anything that the delivery driver or the milk tanker driver comes into the dairy and potentially touches, and then afterwards just making sure that that's all clean before any further, workers come back in and do their normal day-to-day jobs. So, anyone that's delivering goods, obviously try and encourage people to stay in their trucks if they don't have to get out, keep people away. So we're maintaining that social distance. And then if it's package delivery and things like that, and the worker moves the package, then it's the hygiene stuff afterwards. So, the wipes or the soap and water, it's just having that clean afterwards and looking after hygiene in that respect. I guess, yeah, it's probably just pretty much the basic rule of thumb for treating the social distance and the cleanliness and the hygiene. Can't hear Belinda.
She's on mute.
Thanks. We did have the odd glitch, Phil, with your delivery just then. So what I'll do is make sure that those resources are made available. So for those participants, if you're looking for a range of information around service providers in different areas, FarmSafe information, links to any federal or state government initiatives or stimulus package information, or any information that's come through from peak industry bodies, there's a resource tab on the Tas Women in Ag website. And if you click on that, there'll be a range of resources available. So Phil, from FarmSafe, I'll make sure that those resources are put up on the website today for anybody to access.
Belinda, just on that point, just to reinforce what Phil was talking about, one of the things that people could use to demonstrate that they are working with those practices would be to use the NFF workplace guide for COVID-19. There's a fabulous little checklist at the back, and you know, those tools and resources that Phil has mentioned could be adapted to have a little bit of a checklist. So if there's any queries or questions in the workplace down the track, that workplace can show or demonstrate what that they've been doing on their property to minimise risk. That's one of the other handy little tools that people could use.
That's great. Thanks, Caro. Phil's just shared on the screen there the link to Safe Work Australia and also the fact sheet for deliveries and contractors. So I'll make sure that that information is available. The National Farmers Federation COVID-19 workplace information, Caro's correct, it's a great resource, and that information will be also made available. So I know industries have been working very hard to get specific information available, and there is a lot of information that's circulating at the moment, and we can get overloaded with information and what is the right area to look. So depending on your need, have a look at the resources that your peak industry bodies have available, or seek advice from somebody like Rural Business Tas, so that you know then where to target your energy to get the answers that you need. John, I want to move to you with Rural
Belinda,
Alive. Sorry, Phil.
No, you're right, Belinda. Can I just reiterate what Caro said? There's a good checklist on the Safe Work Australia stuff, and the only stuff that I'll circulate is the Safe Work Australia.
Thanks, Phil.
Stuff, because it's coming directly from the, from the national regulator. So.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Phil. We'll make sure that that gets through to the network. John, if I could pass over to you, one of the queries that we've had come through is basically health and wellbeing in the workplace and mental health in particular. If you could just give us a bit of an overview again around some of the things that we need to look at from a worker perspective and also on farm with those close working with us.
Yeah, I guess to start on the home front, because that's kind of, if the home front's going okay, generally the workplace goes okay as well. So I think on the home front, particularly for women in any business, is that relationships can be challenging, home life can be challenging, and what we're sort of noticing is that people are fairly stressed with home life at the moment. And I guess next week we become deputy principal for those of us who've got kids and school teachers and that sort of thing. And I think that's going to be pretty tough. So we're just encouraging people that we're working with to kind of modify their expectations a bit, I guess, and to perhaps not expect as much of each other as partners or husbands and wives, mums and dads, that sort of thing, to obviously have reasonable expectations that things are different at the moment. Having kids at home, trying to run a business at the same time is super challenging. So we're encouraging people to do a lot of self-care. What we're noticing happens in households is that one person gets a bit stressed, and then that kind of, it can get a bit contagious. So mum can get stressed, then that stresses dad out, that stresses the kids out. It sort of just goes around and around in this sort of downward loop. So we're really asking people to do things to self-care. People tell us, oh, well, I haven't got time to self-care. And I kind of flip that on its head and say, well, you don't really have time not to, because if you don't self-care and you end up a crying mess in the corner, you're no good to anyone or to your family or to your business. So really it should be on the same level as eating, sleeping, and it's just a necessity to do that self-care. We've noticed an increase in calls. Lifeline have got an increase in calls I was on our 24-hour phone line last week, and I had a few instances around domestic violence. We know that alcohol use is increasing as well. That's for a couple of reasons. One is sort of increased stress, but also there's a bit more drinking time available to people who are kind of at home all the time. So, and when you don't have to drive and be on the road, you know, people are kind of, you know, it doesn't hurt to have a wine at 4 o'clock. So we are seeing an increase in relationship strain, I guess. Some of the things that RAW are doing now, and that might be useful for some of the businesses, is that we're now offering support for newly unemployed. So if you as a business have had to put people off, we now have a service where we're supporting those job seekers to develop a resume and look for other work. Mental health first aid is something that we're now able to offer online. So that's a combination of e-learning and also face-to-face, well, Zoom to Zoom with our instructors. So that'll be available in May. So spread the word on that one. A lot of people are now looking for mental health first aid for their employees because then they don't have the employees as close, particularly if they're working from home. And so people are concerned about employee mental health. The other thing that we're offering as well is that myself and another senior trainer, she has a master's degree in suicide. She has counselling experience. She has industry experience as well in building and mining. And so we're both offering ourselves for free as consultants to businesses who have got employees working remotely. So it's kind of different when you're used to working with a team, being able to eyeball people, sit down, have a bit of a chat and support people. But now with people working at home, it's a little bit harder to eyeball people, to know how they're travelling. We know that they're stressed. We know that they're juggling work at home and potentially kids and maybe a partner at home. So there are Zoom meetings that go on in there while I'm in here, and you know we're kind of trying to stay out of each other's spaces and that sort of thing. But it is really challenging. So we're offering just to be able to consult with businesses to give them some advice and some strategies around how they can manage their employee mental health at the moment. But for employees, for employers, I think it is a matter of again modifying your expectations of your employees. Some people have got a lot going on, and it can be difficult. Some people can just mask it really well. And so having those conversations with people about how you're travelling, how you're coping with how things are going, things are changing, things are different now, and also just looking for that sort of behaviour change as well. So with mental health, it's always, we're looking for changes in people. Some people are just naturally quiet, but if someone goes quiet, then that's a change that we want to observe. If people are having more absent days, sick days, if people are making mistakes in the workplace, lack of concentration, poor decision making, if they're not getting on with other team members as well as they normally would, it's being able to observe those changes and then having those conversations. And if you're unsure how to have those conversations, get in touch with myself, get in touch with RAW. We can help you have those conversations, and we can also help get involved. So obviously our 1300 helpmate, that's available 24 hours. Would encourage anyone, if you're concerned about anyone, give us a call. We can talk you through it. And just a couple of other things that are happening in the mental health space is that I know that there's been some new Medicare funding released for psychology support services. And to be honest, because of you know, the current pandemic situation, we've never had more access in rural areas to psych support, because people are moving to online psych support and offering it, phone support. So really it's something that you can access from the comfort of your own home. And there's also a really nice Beyond Blue. They've received some government funding, national funding as well, to provide a COVID-19 psychological support service as well. So there are actually more services available to people. It's just kind of a matter of reaching out and accessing those.
Thanks very much, John. Some really good advice there. The new scheme that you started around the newly unemployed, yep. Do they just ring into your office to look at
Absolutely.
accessing that? So is there resources available for employers to be able to then provide that information to their workers if they finished work for COVID-19 reasons?
Yeah, absolutely. If employers just direct those employees to our website or our Facebook page, we've got 2 workers now who are available right now to help them write a resume and provide them some moral support as well, and help them, you know, look for work in the future.
It's good to hear that there's increased access to psychologists as well, because one of the key things that we know is a pressure point around mental health is access to talk to somebody and get some tools, some proactive tools to try and help them through the issues that they're dealing with. So the fact that there is that increased ability to be able to access those critical services, I think, is a really, really good to hear.
Yeah, definitely. And if people want to Zoom with us, we can use Zoom, we can use phone as well. And we've actually started releasing some of our workers to be able to go out and onto farms, but we're doing it outside. So we're not necessarily going into people's houses anymore, but spending some good time on the porch.
That's good. Pass the scones through the window or something like that.
Yep. And all our workers are equipped with PPE, and we now have health and safety protocols in place for that. We don't want to be obviously transferring things from place to place either. So we're taking precautions. That's our duty of care to the people that we work with too, and to our employees.
Thanks, John. That's really good.
Could I just congratulate Raw? I think, you know, we need to not underestimate the mental health, but just the ability to stay in contact. And as leaders, I think, you know, within our industry associations and as employers for many of the people on the panel, we need to make sure that we actually take that lead and not be afraid to ring John or someone when we're having a not so good day, and make sure that that is an acceptable thing for all of our employees and our family members to do, because sometimes we might think that, you know, we're in the midst of providing support to others in the crisis, and certainly I've seen where, you know, we might put ourselves last because, you know, we're busy. We're quite opposite than some of our colleagues that might be looking for work, but that doesn't mean that we don't need that support, particularly when we're dealing with quite a different scenario than what we have in the past. So that support that RAW have made available to industry associations and those at the forefront, I think we should be encouraging to take up.
Yes, thanks, Elizabeth.
You say that, Liz. People can feel like a bit of a failure when they access mental health support services, but really we talk about that as a strength, and it's a sign of resilience to know when you need help and where to get it from. And we all do it all the time. We get help from accountants, we get help from consultants, we get help from contractors, subcontractors. We get help all the time with our operations, and this is no different. It's really interesting. I had a call from a board member of a really large dairy operation, multi-farm operation, and he said, I've just come out of a board meeting and just wanted to bounce some things off you. Sometimes some people in board meetings kind of run right over the top of me. I'm a quiet guy, and sometimes I can't think that well on my feet, and the heart starts racing and all that sort of thing. He said, what can I do about it? So we talked it through. I gave him some strategies, and he was really happy. So it's kind of, you just get a whole range of questions, but it was a great question, and hopefully I gave him some tools to manage his board meetings better. So it could be anything that people can get help with.
That's a really good point, John. And it's, you know, we all need different tools at different times. We react to different situations in different ways. So knowing that there's professional support out there and professionals that we can access in a safe way, that will give us some opportunity to get those skills to help us through different times is really important. So I reiterate Elizabeth's comments in relation to the service that Rural Alive and Well provide. I think there's some fantastic initiatives and great support out there, and I hope that the network, where they need to, will tap into that. So thanks again for what you do for the sector.
Our pleasure.
Thanks, John. Caro, I'll hand over to you, if I may. Anything from your perspective with agri-growth, anything through your network that you believe that we need to have a bit of awareness around? I know that there's a range of grants that are available there at the moment for the sector to look at immediate response, but we're also starting to talk about now, as Elizabeth said, around looking at positioning our businesses for recovery And we need to start thinking about that now, not waiting until the 15th of May and the gates open and the sheep are allowed out.
Thanks, Belinda. I think the best thing that people can do right now, this really is around a business continuity issue for all of us. And the state government does have a really, really easy grant process around a business continuity grant. It's $750 and it's a really, really easy and quick process to go through. All you need to do as a business is just identify a suitably qualified consultant that you may want to get some information in on, and then you put in your application. It's really as simple as that. And if anybody had any challenges around completing the forms, I know that Rural Business Tas would be there to support people to do it, but it's a relatively quick and simple $750 that people can get into their business and look at things like, for example, marketing. If they're not quite sure, I know Women in Agriculture have looked at supporting the network through setting up online shops, but there are also quite a number of businesses out there that are involved in different parts of servicing or agriculture that could really have somebody that dips their toe in a little bit with them and works on an element of their business that helps their thinking out the other side. And that $750 can be a real boon. And it doesn't have to be a certified practicing accountant or anybody like that at all. It can be whether or not you think you need help. I used the marketing example to look at where you need to position yourself after you've established your online shop or whatever it is. That's just one example. So you can go on to the business state growth Business Tasmania website and go through it. It's only a few questions and you can send that through and they're very, very responsive. The other thing that I'd really encourage people to think about is the fact that this situation is changing daily around coronavirus. And I know our agricultural liaison officers and Sue's on the link up today are providing some incredible support to people about trying to work through some of these complexities within their business, particularly around some of those essential traveller movements. But the agricultural liaison officers are there that can point people in the right direction. So that's 1300 292 292. Coronavirus.tas.gov.au is really important for people to look at constantly. Things do change throughout the day. We've heard earlier about the Minister's and the Premier's announcement regarding the temporary visa arrangements for people in the state. So keep an eye on that, and that can again help you. The other area that I know businesses have been trying to seek some clarity on is what Phil mentioned before about how do you manage what happens in your workplace. And again, the NFF Workplace Guide, in addition to the WorkSafe Australia checklist, are really good resources there to help businesses understand what reasonable measures that they can put in place. And if you can show through your systems what you've implemented to support and manage your risk within your workplace, it's a really good thing to help in your business continuity over the next few months, because none of us know how long that this is going to go on for.
Turn your mute off.
My webinar techniques are going very well today. One of the questions that was raised prior to the forum starting was around delivery options for people that are looking to set up new mechanisms and ways of doing business to move their products off farm. So we know that for some of the larger businesses that they might have already got established supply chains that have had minimal disruption. But the smaller niche ones, the smaller niche businesses that were supplying through into your restaurants, clubs, pubs, those types of businesses have had some significant disruption. One of the questions that was asked was, is there any alternatives to delivery options for people to deliver to residents outside of Australia Post? So someone like SRT, for example, only delivers to business. So, Caro, is there anything that you're aware of through your network that would provide some advice to participants around delivery options for products, particularly smaller volumes, or where they could go to get some help to explore that?
There are some networks, B, that are starting to set up some apps to do this, and I have seen social media actually perform some or create some opportunities around this, particularly with people in regions. So I've seen, for example, small businesses that are located in a regional area literally reach out through their social network and go, okay, is anybody going in this particular area? Can we actually combine the delivery to go from A to B? We've already seen groups like Harvest and Eat Well Tasmania also look at setting up some apps. So there is no doubt that social media is performing a task or helping alleviate some of those challenges for people. Again, I think this is where something like that business continuity grant might be able to give businesses the breathing space to look at this in a little bit more detail to try and find out some of these options. There are different platforms that are setting up for online buying, and then it is a matter of who do you then actually work through, whether it's Australia Post or other couriers that are still running. So it is for those of us who are out in regional areas, understand who is still actually doing deliveries, to be able to work out how we can link in with those to try and make it a little bit more efficient to do those deliveries. It's not an easy answer for me to be able to give people, because there isn't a coordination point. It's one of the things that Tasmania generally struggles a lot with in our distribution within the state and also on and off the island for small dispatching. It's a problem that I think is not just symptomatic of COVID-19. So I'd encourage people to put information out on social media, reach out to your other business partners. It's amazing how many conversations that I've seen with people where they've been reaching out to other people in their area and going, hey, do you know of anybody who can do X? Do you know of anybody out of work who can do Y? And there are these apps out there that do link people together to perform tasks, like Airtasker, for example. So people can link into those again to see whether or not that can help them.
No, some good advice there. Thanks, Caro. And what I was thinking of also, going along similar lines, is if you know of somebody that has set up an on-farm online delivery service, potentially there's the opportunity to partner if you're working in the same area, to go, well, if only half your vehicle's full, can I fill up the other half, and see how that works, so you're sharing some of the cost. So again, it's about connecting with people in your area and seeing what opportunities that are there to share cost and get product moving. So there is some opportunities there, I feel.
Yeah, there's groups like Cradle Coast Food Network, the East Coast Producers Groups, those groups, even like Women in Agriculture, reaching out to our own little regional networks just to touch base. You never know. There are a lot of people out there dealing with the similar logistics problems and doing, backloads and working together. And I've seen this happen reasonably well over the last few weeks, is what can help some of us smaller providers manage these costs within our business.
Yeah, thanks. That's great, Caro. And I encourage anybody, the grants that Caroline was talking about, the $750 grants, if this is one of the areas that you're grappling with as a small business, how am I going to get my product delivered more efficiently, then have a look at those grants, because there is the possibility that you can get some really good, easy and efficient solutions out of the problems that you are grappling with at the moment. Before we close, I'll just talk about some of that recovery discussion that we've been having, and recognising that government and peak industry bodies and service providers are looking at recovery phase and tools that we need to look at around recovery phase. So as a network, some of the things that we'd be looking for to get some feedback from the network is, what does the sector need in relation to initiatives that we can plan for recovery? So that might be the government's looking for innovative approaches that are outside of the normal one that people would be potentially looking for around taxation relief. We know that because of the measures that the state and federal government have been putting in play, that there is going to be some budgetary pressures. So what we're looking at from sector providers is to see what sort of innovative solutions that we can come up with and start exploring as peak industry bodies and sector participants, to be able to then feed back through into government so that we can start making these plans. So if anybody within the network has some ideas on some steps that we can look at exploring around recovery that we can build into overall business continuity plans, we'd be really interested to hear about those so that we can explore those further and have those ready to go when we move into that phase. The other information that we'll be forwarding through to our network shortly is some survey questions around labour, just so that we can get a bit more of an idea on what labour is out there, particularly the casual pool, to make sure that they're being supported. And there may be also some other information that will be coming through social media feeds in relation to links or initiatives that are available for businesses that are currently facing some type of hardship or need answers to some of the queries that they may have. So I haven't got any other questions that have come through the feed at the moment. So what I'd like to do is, again, apologise for the start of the webinar with the technology issues. I'd like to thank everybody for their questions that were forwarded through for us to ask the panel. And on behalf of Tasmanian Women in Agriculture, I'd like to thank Andrew, Elizabeth, Phil, John and Caro for your contribution and opportunity for the network to ask you some questions. And we'll look at having another Paddock Talk again in a couple of weeks, and we'll get some information out shortly as to what that topic would be. So thanks again, everybody. Stay safe, and we look forward to connecting again with you soon.
Thanks, Belinda.
See you later. Look forward to it.